Would you have the courage to raise another woman's child and be called an intruder in your own home? For years, Donna Celia, 59, believed that love was enough. She believed that the affection given without obligation would one day return in the form of gratitude. But that morning, hearing the dry sound of a key turning in the door, she realized she was about to learn the opposite. "You have to understand, Donna Celia," said Renato, the boy she raised as her own son. "This house is mine now. Daddy left everything to me." She looked around, and her heart tightened. Every corner of that house held a memory. The sofa where the boy slept when he had a fever. The wall where she marked his height with a pencil, year after year. And now, each memory was a weight she would have to leave behind. "Renato," she tried to say, her voice trembling, "I'm the one who raised you. I taught you to ride a bike. I took you to your first day of school." "I know," he interrupted coldly. "But my father left everything to me. I don't want any trouble." She took a deep breath, trying to hold back tears. For a moment, she wanted to ask where she had gone wrong, but the answer came on its own, cutting. Loving too much is sometimes the most costly mistake. She picked up her purse, adjusted the scarf around her neck, and looked at the house one last time. The curtains, the photos, the smell of coffee, everything seemed to be saying goodbye along with her. "That's right, Renato." Her voice was firm, but her eyes said otherwise. "May God give you more wisdom than He gave you an inheritance." And then she left, without looking back. The gate closed slowly, as if destiny itself wanted to watch the scene until the end. On the sidewalk, with the sun beating down on her face, Celia felt the wind carry the memories along with the tears. That day, she lost her roof, but she would still discover that true love doesn't need walls to live in. Donna Celia had always been the kind of woman who believed that good things would return. She never expected wealth, recognition, or luck. Her greatest inheritance was her calmness and the way she knew that life, however hard, could still be beautiful. She had been widowed early, at 43, when she lost her first husband to a sudden heart attack. From the marriage there were no children, only loneliness and a small house in the suburbs. But Celia didn't complain. She learned to survive alone, to find solace in the silence of the mornings and the sound of the radio while making coffee. It was on an ordinary afternoon that she met Antonio, a man with kind eyes, a shy smile, and a hidden pain that she recognized from afar, the pain of someone who had also lost someone. He was a widower, father of a 6-year-old boy named Renato. His wife had died of pneumonia, and since then, father and son had lived in a void that time did not heal. Celia approached slowly, as if not wanting to take up too much space. At first they spoke little, exchanging greetings, sharing simple conversations about the neighborhood, the weather, the price of bread. But, little by little, life began weaving their destinies together with invisible threads. Antonio started appearing more frequently, always bringing Renato by the hand. The boy, with his large, curious eyes, observed Celia with the innocent distrust of someone who had lost the reference point of love. She, on the other hand, looked at him and saw something familiar, the neediness of someone who only needed comfort, not advice. The first hug happened by chance. Renato tripped and fell in the yard, scraping his knee. Antonio ran over, distressed, but it was Celia who helped him up. She cleaned the wound, blew on the burning sensation, and whispered, "There, there. Now it'll pass." Renato looked at her and asked, "Are you my aunt?" She smiled. "Not yet, but I can be your friend." And from that day on, it was as if the hearts of the three had found shelter in each other. Time passed, and the love between Celia and Antonio grew naturally. They married shortly after, in a simple ceremony with homemade cake and the scent of flowers from the backyard. Renato wore clothes that were too small and held the flowers as if they were the couple's own son. And in a way, they were. From then on, Celia became the maternal figure the boy never wanted to let go of. She was the one who took him to his first day of school. She was the one who made him eat vegetables hidden in the rice. She was the one who took care of his fevers, his homework, his nighttime fears. And every night before going to sleep, she made a point of repeating the same phrase, "Good night, my son. God bless you." Renato called her Mother Celia. It was an affection that made her feel whole, and every time he hugged her, she forgot that she hadn't given birth to him, because the love she felt didn't come from her womb, it came from her heart. Antonio, in turn, was grateful. He worked hard and saw in Celia the foundation that supported the house and the boy. "You were the miracle of our lives," he would say whenever he could. She would answer with a smile, "I only did what love told me to do." The years passed peacefully. Renato grew up surrounded by affection. He had his first job, his graduation, his first girlfriend. Celia followed everything closely, applauding, crying, cheering. And when his father fell ill, she was the one who took care of everything. Antonio spent the last months of his life between the hospital and his bed at home. Renato, now an adult, would come to visit, but he seemed tired, absent. Celia, on the other hand, was always there. She served the soup, changed the sheets, held her husband's hand in silence when the pain was too great to be spoken. Before dying, Antonio called them both. His body was already weak, but his eyes were still firm. "Celia, take care of my son, okay?" She held his hand. "I always have, Antonio, and I will continue to." He looked at Renato and said, in a trembling voice, "Listen to your mother. She loves you more than I can explain." Those were his last words, and Celia promised, before her husband's body, that she would never let Renato lack anything. In the following months, she did everything she could to keep the house alive. She paid the bills with her pension, made repairs, cleaned, cooked. Renato came occasionally, bringing groceries, leaving hurried messages. But little by little he distanced himself. He had his own life, his own plans, and Celia, who had once been the center of everything, became just a memory. Even so, she didn't complain. "Young people are like that," she told herself. "The world pulls you forward, and you stay behind, taking care of the rear." She still spoke of him with pride, to the neighbor, to the postman, to the parish priest. "My son is a good man," she would say, with the smile that only mothers have. But time began to change the tone of the visits. Renato came less often, and when he did come, he no longer asked, "How are you, Mom?" but "How are things going with Dad?" Celia noticed his cold demeanor, his distant gaze, but pretended not to see it. She preferred silence to disappointment. Deep down, she knew that love was fading, but a mother's love doesn't give up. She still hoped. She hoped for the embrace, the longing, the good memories. And she didn't know that in a short time, the same boy she raised with such care would be the man who would call her "my father's woman." She didn't bear him in her womb, but she raised him in her heart. And that's precisely why the pain to come isn't just loss, it's ingratitude, the wound that only those who truly love are capable of feeling. The house was silent, but not sad. Celia always found a way to fill the space with life. Soft music on the radio, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, the sound of the cloth being wrung out in the wash basin. It was the sound of someone transforming loneliness into routine. Since Antonio had left, the house seemed too big, but Celia kept it alive. The curtains were clean, the flowers in the vase, his portrait on the sideboard. Every morning she lit a candle before the photo and said, "Take care of us from up there, Antonio. The boy needs it more than ever." Renato came from time to time, always in a hurry, his eyes tired, his cell phone in hand. He would give her a quick kiss on the forehead and say, "Is everything all right, Mother Celia?" She would smile. "Yes, my son. Do you want coffee?" "No, I just stopped by to pick up some documents from Dad." The time of a visit was no longer measured in hours, but in minutes. Even so, she was content with that. While he rummaged through drawers, she took the opportunity to straighten his shirt collar, comment on the weather, ask if he was eating properly. It was her way of continuing to be a mother, even when her son no longer needed her. The days went by the same, until something changed. One afternoon, Renato arrived with a young woman. "Mother Celia, this is Marcia," he said with a tense smile. "We've been together for a while." The young woman was beautiful, elegant, but her gaze measured everything around her, as if evaluating the value of things before evaluating people. Celia was kind. She offered coffee, cake, asked about her work, but she noticed that Marcia avoided calling her by name, and when she did, Donna Celia sounded cold, distant, like speaking to a stranger. In the days that followed, Marcia's presence became constant. She came with Renato, fiddled with things in the house, suggested changes. These curtains could be changed, they're a bit old. These dark furniture pieces make everything look heavy. Celia smiled with the patience of someone who already understood that some people confuse modernity with disrespect. Your taste is beautiful, my dear, but this house has history. Marcia only replied, too much history for my taste. The phrase echoed in Celia's mind. Too much history. It was her history. The house, the furniture, the garden, everything had been built with a lifetime of love. But to that young woman, it seemed like just a backdrop that needed to be erased. Renato began to change. He spent more time silent, distracted, impatient. When Celia tried to talk, he responded with short phrases. Everything's fine, Mom. Working a lot. You don't need to worry. She noticed the distance, but tried to hide it. She spent more time taking care of the house, as if fixing what was outside could fix what was inside. At night, she prayed before bed, asking God not to let the boy's love be lost in the wrong hands. But love, when neglected, rots in silence. One afternoon, she heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Renato's voice, irritated, and Marcia's, impatient. I'm just saying that it's impossible to get married and continue living here with her, Renato. Celia's heart froze. She leaned against the wall, listening unintentionally. Marcia, she has nowhere to go. And I don't want to live in a house full of memories of another woman. She's not another woman. She's my mother. Mother? She's your father's second wife. Celia took a step back. She felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. That word, spoken with contempt, second wife, cut deeper than any insult. She stood there, listening to the argument until the sound of voices faded into the distance. That night she didn't eat dinner. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking at Antonio's portrait. She spoke softly, almost in a whisper. I did everything you asked, Antonio. I took care of our boy. I made him a man. Her eyes filled with tears. I just didn't imagine that, for that, I would have to lose the house and the love I helped build. In the following days, she tried to act naturally. She tidied Renato's room, ironed his clothes, pretended not to hear the whispers in the hallway. But the atmosphere was no longer the same. Marcia looked at her with the disdain of someone who thinks kindness is weakness. Renato, torn, tried to please both sides and ended up hurting the only one who had always loved him unconditionally. One Sunday, during lunch, the tension finally broke the silence. Marcia commented casually, Renato, we could renovate the house after the wedding. Celia, smiling, replied, Renovations are good, my daughter, but I hope you don't take away what belongs to your father. Marcia looked up. Sometimes, to start a new life, you have to get rid of what's old. Celia held her fork, trying to hide the trembling in her hands. Old isn't what's left over, my daughter. It's what still resists. Renato stood up from the table, irritated. That's enough, please. Lunch ended in silence, and at that moment, Celia knew that the house, which had once been a refuge, was beginning to exclude her. The following weeks were long. Renato and Marcia began sleeping in another room. The laughter that once echoed in the mornings was replaced by slamming doors, whispers, and glances that avoided hers. Even so, Celia insisted on serving coffee, preparing lunch, keeping everything in its place. It was her way of resisting, silent but firm, until one day she found an envelope on the counter with her name on it. Inside, a note with a few words. We need to talk. Tomorrow. Renato. She knew. She didn't need to read anything else. The love she had given her whole life was about to be thrown out along with the memories. And as the clock struck 9 at night, Celia closed her eyes and thought, to educate is to teach love. The morning was cold. The sun tried to pierce through the living room curtains, but it seemed tired, as if it too knew what was to come. Celia woke up early, as always. She made coffee, mopped the floor, changed the flowers in the vase. She wanted to maintain her routine, because sometimes normality is the last shield before a fall. At 10 o'clock, she heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. Renato entered the kitchen with a different look, a look that mixed guilt and decision. The kind of look of someone who already knows what they're going to say, but doesn't know how to say it without hurting themselves. Mother Celia, he began, hesitating. We need to talk. She put down the mop, wiped her hands on her apron, and smiled, trying to disguise her unease. Of course, my son. Sit down. Would you like some coffee? He didn't answer. He just looked around, as if saying goodbye to a place before even leaving it. It's about the house, he said finally. Marcia and I are getting married next month. Celia smiled, her heart aching. That's wonderful, my son. God bless you both. Renato lowered his head. We're going to renovate the house. Do it our way. She was still trying to follow along. Of course, whatever is best for your happiness. He sighed deeply. Mom, Marcia thinks it's best if you move out. The silence that followed was so dense it seemed to fill the air. Celia blinked slowly, trying to understand what she had just heard. Move out? She repeated softly. Renato didn't look her in the eyes. Yes, Mom. The house is mine now. Dad left everything to me. She took a deep breath. I know. But this house was also my house, Renato. It was here that I raised you, that I took care of your father, that I taught you to walk, to talk to God. He shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. I know that, and I'm grateful. But life goes on, Mom. You'll be all right. That word, grateful, sounded like a sentence, because gratitude said to justify abandonment is not a virtue. It's cowardice. And where do you want me to go? She asked, her voice trembling but without tears. Renato hesitated. Marcia has some acquaintances. They can help you find a place. A place, he repeated, his words bitter. I spent my life building this. Silence returned. A silence that screamed everything they hadn't dared to say. Celia looked around. The old clock, the worn sofa, the curtain she had embroidered herself. Each object seemed to observe the scene with astonishment. Renato stood up. We'll help you with your things. She smiled, with irony and pain. Things? What things, Renato? Because what I had most of, you've already taken. He wanted to answer, but his voice wouldn't come out. Celia then straightened her posture, adjusted the scarf around her neck and said, Don't worry, I know how to go out alone. As she packed her few clothes in her suitcase, memories came rushing back like a whirlwind. His first baby tooth, the fever at 8 years old, the fear of sleeping alone, his small hands gripping the hem of her dress. And now, those same hands signing the paper that took her away from the home she had built. Marcia appeared in the doorway, holding a folder. I hope you understand. It's not personal. Celia looked up. Everything cowardly is personal, my daughter. Marcia looked away, embarrassed. It's better for everyone. Not for everyone, Celia replied firmly. Just for the two of you. Renato entered soon after, trying to hurry things along. Mom, let me call a taxi. She raised her hand, interrupting. I know how to walk. I learned before you were born. She calmly put away her last mementos, a rosary, an old photograph, and a small wooden box where she kept her husband's letters. She picked up her purse and went to the door. Before leaving, she looked at her son and she said, You think you're kicking me out of the house, Renato? He looked up, confused. But in truth, you're kicking yourself out of me. And then she left, slowly, with the firm step of someone who had lost everything except her dignity. Outside, the air seemed colder. Celia stopped on the sidewalk, looked at the house one last time and whispered, God, teach me to unlove without turning to stone. It rained lightly, as if the sky wanted to wash away what she couldn't say. Tears came, but didn't last. Celia was one of those women who cry little, not because they feel less, but because they've learned that the world doesn't stop to see their suffering. She walked slowly to the corner. Each step seemed like a farewell. The sound of wet shoes mingled with the sound of the rain, and even without a destination, she felt that the worst was already behind her. Hours later, she arrived at the house of an old friend, Donna Nair. The woman opened the door and was startled by her state. Celia, what happened, my dear? She tried to smile. I only lost the roof over my head, Nair, but I still have solid ground. Donna Nair hugged her, and in that simple hug, Celia found what she didn't have in the house she lost: comfort. That night, before going to sleep, she wrote a single sentence on a piece of paper. I raised a child who wasn't mine, and I was expelled for loving more than I should have. She folded the paper and placed it inside the Bible, between the pages of Psalm 91. She prayed softly, asking for strength, and she slept. Not because the pain had passed, but because she knew that the next day the sun would rise again, and so would she. She left with her head held high, carrying the weight of ingratitude on her body, and in her soul the pride of never having been like them. But there are hearts that only learn when they lose. In the first few days, Celia barely understood what had happened. She woke up early, as always, and for a moment forgot, until she looked around and realized that the roof over her head was no longer hers. The small room in Donna Nair's house smelled of soap and fresh coffee. It was simple, cozy, but strange. It lacked the sound of the old clock, the noise of Renato's footsteps, the creaking of the doors of the house where she had lived for over 20 years. On the first night, she couldn't sleep. She lay down and stared at the ceiling. She heard the wind, the noise of passing cars, and the voice of conscience asking, mercilessly, "Where did I go wrong?" But there was no answer. Because those who love too much don't err intentionally. They err by believing that the love of others has the same root as their own. Donna Nair was the kind of friend who spoke little and understood much. She prepared the coffee, left the bread on the table, and said only, "Eat, Celia. God isn't finished with you yet." And she ate in silence, her eyes fixed on the window. During the day, she helped with household chores, sewed clothes for neighbors, and tried to keep her hands busy because she knew that when the hands stop, the heart speaks too loudly. At night, she would sit on the porch and gaze at the sky. She imagined the son she had raised sleeping in the house she could no longer enter, and she wondered if he thought of her, or if his love had also been thrown out with her. One afternoon, while tidying her things, she found an old box. Inside were yellowed photographs. Little Renato in his school uniform, Renato blowing out candles, Renato embracing her at graduation. Her hands trembled. Each photo was a memory and now a wound. She looked at a picture of the two of them smiling under a parasol on the beach. Renato must have been about 10 years old. In that photo, the world was still simple. "I should have frozen that day," she whispered. "His love still lived within me." She put the photos back, but couldn't close the box. She stared at the open lid, like someone facing a past that insists on breathing. Time passed slowly. Weeks turned into months, and Celia began to relearn how to live. She found a small job helping at the neighborhood parish. She sewed altar cloths, cleaned pews, and assisted at Mass. It wasn't what she used to do, but it was enough to feel she still had a purpose. The people at church liked her. They called her Donna Celia of the Rosary. She smiled humbly, always with a gentle but distant gaze, the gaze of someone who still lives in memories that have no address. Sometimes, when someone asked for prayers for their children, she lowered her head, and her heart ached. Because praying for others is easy. What's difficult is praying for those who hurt you, and still calling them "my child" at the end of the prayer. But she prayed, every night, "Lord, protect Renato. Even far from me, may he not be lost. And if his love has ended, may yours never fail." One day at the market, she met an old neighbor. The woman was surprised. "Celia, my God, it's been so long." She smiled without enthusiasm. "Yes, time flies by." "And Renato?" asked the neighbor. "He must be happy with the wedding, right?" Celia paused for a second. Her smile faded. "He must be," she replied simply. "God knows what he's doing." The woman noticed the change in her tone and tried to change the subject, but Celia was already far away, walking between the stalls, her eyes brimming with tears. Because sometimes the worst thing isn't remembering, it's being reminded of what you want to forget. One rainy night, sitting at the table, Celia wrote a letter. She didn't know if she would deliver it, but she needed to get out what her heart could no longer bear to keep inside. "My son, I know the world taught you that what matters is what's yours on paper, but what I gave you didn't have a signature. I held you when your mother couldn't anymore. I gave you love when the world still saw you as a child. And even now, when you took me from home, I still pray that God protects you, because a mother's love doesn't expel. It only blesses and goes away." She folded the paper, put it inside the Bible, and didn't speak of the matter again. But that night, She slept more lightly, because some pains only cease when they are written down. Time continued to pass, and the longing was no longer a knife, it was a scar. Celia began to get used to her new home, to the sound of birds in the morning, to the smell of the wet street. But sometimes she still dreamed of the old gate, the dining table, the boys' laughter that echoed in the hallway. And when she woke up, she said to herself, I didn't lose a son. I only returned to life what I created with love. One Sunday, as she left Mass, she met Father Miguel, a man with a calm voice and a deep gaze. He approached her and said, Celia, God sent me to tell you something. She looked at him, curious. What, Father? That the love you planted will still blossom. She smiled, her eyes welling up with tears. Sometimes, Father, we plant in dry soil. He shook his head. No soil is too dry for love. It just needs the right rain. And without knowing it, he had just announced what was to come, because soon life would show that even the hardest heart can ask for forgiveness again. That night, as she turned off the light, Celia looked at the sky through the window. She whispered, as if talking to someone far away, Lord, I don't want revenge. I just want to forget the face of the one who forgot mine. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and slept peacefully. Because her weary soul, even wounded, still knew the path to forgiveness. The months passed like pages from a book Celia no longer wanted to read. The routine at Dona Nair's house had become part of her life. The masses, the sewing, the afternoon coffee, the rosary before bed. The old pain had become a memory, and the silence was no longer punishment. It was peace. Until, one rainy Saturday afternoon, someone knocked on the door. The sound was timid, almost shy. Dona Nair went to answer. Outside, a man with a weary face, dirty clothes, and a lost look in his eyes. Are you a friend of Dona Celia's? He asked in a low voice. She recognized him immediately. Renato? He nodded, unable to lift his eyes. I need to speak with her. Please. Dona Nair looked at him for a moment, assessing the weight of the past he carried, and then called out, Celia, you have a visitor. Celia came from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a cloth. When she saw who was at the door, time stood still. Her face hardened, but her eyes filled with tears. Renato, she whispered. What happened? He lowered his head. I lost everything, Mother Celia. His voice trembled, almost broke. The house burned down. Marcia left me. I have nothing left. She remained silent for a long moment. The words seemed too distant to reach her. Her heart pounded, not with anger but with compassion. The man before her was not the ungrateful one who had driven her out. He was the lost boy she had once cradled in her arms. Come in, Renato, she said serenely. It's raining outside. He hesitated. I don't deserve it, Mother. Deserving isn't a condition for love, my son, she replied. That's why it's so rare. Renato entered slowly. The smell of fresh coffee reminded him of his childhood. He looked around, seeing the simple but clean environment, full of small details that reflected her personality. The embroidered cloth, the flowers, the hanging rosary. And it was there, in that humble setting, that shame began to tighten his chest. Celia served coffee without saying a word. He held the cup with trembling hands. I should have come to you sooner, he said, his voice choked with emotion. She took a deep breath. Our timing isn't always God's timing, Renato. He began to cry. I was an idiot, Mom. You were a son, she replied calmly, and sons make mistakes. The silence that followed was dense, but clean, the kind of silence that doesn't accuse, only understands. Renato put his hands to his face. I thought I owned the world, Mom. Marcia. She only made me see what I wanted to see. And what did you see? That I was better than you. He looked up, crying. But the truth is, I never even came close. Celia looked him in the eyes, and her expression softened. Don't talk like that, my son. I raised you to be happy, not to be perfect. Renato swallowed his tears. I took you from the house your father left us. She smiled sadly. You only took a roof from me, Renato, but you never managed to take me away from God. He fell to his knees before her. Forgive me, Mother, please. She placed her hand on his head, as she did when he was little. Forgiveness is for those who have peace, Renato. She paused, her eyes welling up. And peace is what I have in abundance." Renato cried like a child, and Celia, even with her tired body and heart full of scars, hugged him. A firm, warm, lingering hug, the kind of hug that heals what time has wounded. In that instant, she understood what Father Miguel had said months before. No soil is too dry for love. It just needs the right rain. And the rain that day fell into her chest, not from the sky. After a while, he told her everything. The house, destroyed by a short circuit. Marcia, leaving with what little remained. The debts, the despair, the shame, and the memory of her returning insistently, like an echo of what was true. Celia listened to everything without interrupting. When he finished, she simply said, "Sometimes, God needs to take everything away from us to show us what truly has value." He nodded, wiping away his tears. "Can I stay here for a few days?" She smiled. "This is my mother's house, Renato, and a mother's house doesn't have a departure date." In the days that followed, he helped with the chores, accompanied her to church, sewed benches, repaired the gate. He slept in the small room, and every night left the door ajar, as if afraid of losing the comfort again. Celia watched, in silence, the boy slowly returning. She saw in his gestures a sincere remorse, and within her something was healing too, not the past, but the way she remembered it. One night, while she was praying, he approached and said, "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Yes, my son. After everything I've done to you, why do you still call me son?" She looked at him tenderly and replied, "Because love that is born true never gets lost. It just changes houses." A few months later, life seemed calmer. Renato got a new job, rented a simple little house near hers. Celia continued with her routine, the rosary, the flowers, the coffee. But now, when she looked at the gate, she saw her son arriving from time to time, with a shy smile and a bag of bread in his hand. "I brought this for you," he would say, and she would reply in the same tone as always, "Thank you, my son." Time healed what seemed impossible. The resentment turned into learning. The abandonment turned into faith. And love. Love became an inheritance, one of those the heart can never spend. That night, as the sun set behind the trees, Celia silently gave thanks. She looked at the sky and said, "Thank you, Lord, because what I lost in walls, you gave back to me in soul." The wind blew gently through the window, and for the first time in a long time she felt she was home again. Not in her old home, but within herself. Time passed. The seasons changed. The flowers bloomed again in the yard, and life, finally, seemed to have found its rhythm once more. In that small, simple, and silent home, Celia rediscovered something the world could never give her: peace. She woke up early, as always. She put the kettle on the fire, made coffee, and opened the window to let the sun in. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with that of the plants in the yard, and each morning seemed like an answered prayer. Renato came to visit her frequently. He brought bread, fruit, and a different look, more human, more like a son. There were no speeches or promises, there were gestures, and in those gestures she saw a regret that no words could explain. "Are you all right, Mom?" he asked, arranging the groceries on the table. She smiled. "I am, my son. Better than ever. Did you really forgive me?" She gently stroked his face. "I never needed to forgive, Renato." He looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "Because whoever truly loves doesn't hold on to debt, only longing." Over time, Celia's heart began to feel that there was still something to be done. The love she had always spread within the house now needed a new destination. That's when she decided to visit the children's shelter run by the parish. The place was small, with blue-painted walls and the smell of soap. The children ran around the yard, laughing loudly. Seeing them, something inside her awakened, as if her soul recognized that sound. She knelt down, and a little girl of about 5 years old came running towards her. "Miss, did you come to play?" she asked, holding her hand. Celia smiled. "I came to take care of you, and to play too." From that day on, she began to help at the shelter. She sewed clothes, told stories, taught the children to pray before bed. They called her Grandma Celia, and every time a little hand squeezed hers, her heart mended a little more. Renato, upon hearing this, was moved. You never stop taking care of others, do you? She laughed. It's what I know how to do, my son. When our hearts are made to love, they never retire. One afternoon, he appeared with an envelope. Mom, I got some money from the house insurance. I want you to accept it. She looked at him calmly. Money doesn't pay for what life has already given me back, Renato, but I want to help you. Then help those in need, she replied, handing the envelope back. There are homeless children waiting for love. Give them what you thought you could buy from me. He held the envelope, moved. I don't deserve a mother like you. She smiled tenderly. And I didn't deserve such a lost son. But God thought we could still find each other. Over time, the shelter became her second home. Celia taught the girls to sew and the boys to tend the garden. In the eyes of those children, she saw the reflection of what she once was, someone who only needed affection to continue believing in goodness. The loneliness that once hurt was now a choice. The silence that once hurt was now rest. And every night, before going to sleep, she wrote in her notebook, There is no loss when love returns in another way. Sometimes it only changes body, name, destiny, but it continues to be love. One Sunday, after Mass, Renato accompanied her to the gate. Before leaving, he stood still for a moment, looking at her. Mother, what do you feel when you look at me? He asked, almost in a whisper. She thought for a moment, then replied, I feel peace. Even after everything I've done? She nodded. Because I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without pain. Renato approached and hugged her tightly. And in that wordless embrace, their story came to a close, not as a tragedy, but as a lesson. Celia, now 60 years old, lived lightly. She didn't own a house, but she possessed what no one could take away, a home within her own heart, a home made of faith, love, good memories, and everything that survives after pain. And when, at night, she sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the rosary on the table, she said to herself, I lost my roof, but I gained heaven. I lost a house, but I found a new heart. And for the first time in a long time, she slept without fear, with a smile that came from within. The smile of someone who finally understood that being a mother isn't about having. It's about being. Time did not erase Donna Celia's story. She carried away the tears, the sorrow, the fear, but her essence remained. And as the years passed, her life became a lesson. A simple and profound lesson. Those who truly love don't need a surname to be a mother, nor walls to have a home. Many believe that life is measured by what one achieves. Celia learned the opposite. Life is measured by what one endures, and even so, continues to love. She lost her house, but she never lost her heart. And sometimes, that's all that matters, continuing to have a heart capable of forgiving even after it has been broken. Nowadays, when someone asks about the past, she smiles and replies, The love I gave was sincere. And that's already more than many people can say, because gratitude can end. Presents can end. But true love, the kind that doesn't demand or require, that continues to live in the heart, and no one can evict it. Donna Celia's story is that of so many women whom the world doesn't applaud, but who sustain love with their own hands. Women who raised children who weren't their own, who cared for homes where they were once treated as strangers, who were forgotten, replaced, misunderstood, but who never stopped loving. Women whom time calls strong, but who only wanted to be seen as human, tired, in pain, longing. And yet they moved on. Because being strong sometimes isn't about enduring. It's about continuing to give what little is left. If you're listening to this story, perhaps you know someone like Celia, or perhaps you are her. Perhaps you too have been left aside, judged, forgotten. Perhaps you too have loved someone who didn't choose you back. But if you still have love within you, love for those who hurt you, love for what you've lived through, love for who you've become, then you've already won. Because the love that remains after pain is the love the world most needs to learn. How many women raise children who aren't theirs and end up being treated as strangers? How many lose everything they have, but remain whole inside? A mother's love doesn't have to come from blood, but respect, that should come from the heart. If this story touched you, if you've ever experienced the pain of caring for someone who forgot you, or if you've ever had to start over when the world left you alone, follow our channel and become part of this community of women who overcome the difficulties and adversities that fate brings. Here, every day, we tell real stories of strength, forgiveness, and rebirth, because no woman should beg for love, nor accept less than the respect she deserves. And together, we show that the most beautiful love is the one that continues even when the world tries to extinguish it.